Cole chuckled to himself as the gear they were sharing as trophies were each other's and imagined that nobody would notice the difference. He realized that while he expected a little resistance, that he hadn't expected this much, this fast. It was good he came alone, because even with a small group, they would be quickly noticed, analyzed, and attacked. If they couldn't be attacked, they would be dogged until worn out, then swiftly executed at exhaustion levels. Months earlier, Cole had been at an immigration rally to support legal immigration and was followed 6 blocks by over 40 masked men. Multiple calls to the police left him with only one officer willing to help that had to nearly immediately flee for his own safety. 2 other officers arrived only to side with the masked men and promptly left after telling Cole he had to find his own way out. Cole got turned around a few times and got spit on, dirt thrown on him, kicked, and eventually lost his radio to the assault. He tried to explain he was there for the same reasons as everyone else, but it didn't matter. After being followed for what seemed like 5 or 6 blocks, Cole eventually made it to a hospital where he ducked in to evade capture without any help from the corrupt police. Cole had always had respect for the police, but there seemed to be less good cops every day during the throes of the collapse. They did partially redeem themselves when a brave citizen tried to swoop in to help and got brutally beaten by about 12 men. It was so dark and Cole hadn't seen him go down or get away. Later, the heroic citizen was able to circle around and make his way back to the police station, which got him into a building and gave him first aid. Current time. Now post-collapse, hospitals offered no such reprieve and were empty shells of their former status. Even the other ethnic gangs had no protection to offer as they had been. Even the other ethnic gangs had no protection left to offer. Right when the collapse started, they had been the only real resistance left in the area, all executed publicly MS-13 style. The other gangs fled when imagery of their prior rival gangs were seen chopped up in city parks. Prior rival gangs chopped up in city parks started surfacing. The cops either joined, left, or died. The border militias pulled out the second the gun laws passed and redistributed and joined up with their buddies to protect Arizona's border, along with New Mexico and Texas, all 3 of which held steadfast. None of that would dissuade Cole, though. These cartel, mafia, whatever, operated on fear, and he knew no fear. Cole was now much stronger than he'd ever been and knew the odds. He knew how to beat them at their own game, and nobody would ever get left behind again. Cole snapped back to current time and tried to think back to what he was trying to do prior to getting jumped and chased to his most recent drop-off location. He thought for a few minutes as he walked, then remembered there was a clue that had led him to the computer store. The cartel obviously didn't want him near it because they chased him off, but they were off partying now. The fact that they celebrated literally everything with copious amounts of cheap alcohol would be what allowed Cole to get back in that superstore. Regardless of what was in the building, he could at least reload his mags on his dual-barrel, dual-mag 45 ACP and maybe find some goodies. Cole got dropped off with basically nothing, having to get smuggled past more checkpoints than he could even remember. All he'd come with was keys, which made an improvised knuckle duster, but that was about it. Better than nothing. But the last thing he wanted to do was ruin his only way of getting into the various lockboxes by using the keys as weapons. Cole had needed to use the key punch maneuver on a few groups already, but having to bend the keys back into place at one point, he decided it wasn't a good idea anymore. Thankfully, the keys had worked in the office building, and he hoped they would work in the computer store. Checking and listening at every intersection, Cole defiantly backtracked across the final set of streets to the computer superstore for the second time in as many days. The bollards were up and several vehicles were completely destroyed trying to drive through them. Our garbage truck abandoned nearby, presumably without fuel. The protective windows were splintered from people bashing them with hammers, bricks, and more, but held fast. Cole shined his special filtered light around the door but found no hidden indicators of friendlies. He was sure this was the place, though, otherwise why had someone at one of the checkpoints given him the key for here? The only clue was computer store, and this was the biggest one Cole had seen, and actually the only one that wasn't torched in all the riots immediately after the collapse. Well, Cole had to take that back. There was probably one other district that hadn't burnt down that probably had a computer store, but the urban legend was something about tons of rooftop Koreans with sniper rifles. Cole chuckled and figured he'd pass on that one. The word was that they were doing fine and not letting any outsiders in anyway. No, Cole was looking in the right spot. He was sure of it. At his feet, chains lay destroyed that Cole had to walk over. Handles had come clean off, but the doors still held. Nothing remained to continue the tug-of-war with the entrance. Another amusing moment struck Cole when the would-be marauders realized the handles were merely decoys and not fastened to the doors well enough to compromise the structure. Cole couldn't tell if people were using the garbage truck for transport, to smash into buildings, or both. It didn't smell, but he stayed away from it anyway. He suspected it had simply run out of fuel and was abandoned here. Before trying the key he had on the front doors, Cole thought to check the keyhole to make sure there was no obstructions. He shined his flashlight on it for a second. Much to his dismay, it was full of gum. Cole checked the backup lock, and it had a key that had been smashed in with a hammer and broken off with pliers. Cole shrugged and decided to do a once around the building. Cole mumbled to himself that the gum would be impossible to get out, would ruin the lock and ruin his key. Cole checked every lock around the building, and they were all gummed up, except for one possibly that was blocked with a huge dumpster. He couldn't see the lock, but all he had was hope. Cole shoved the dumpster with about half his strength, trying to see the lock, but the dumpster wouldn't budge. He tried around 80% strength. Still nothing. The dumpster seemed to be buried in some muck that had solidified, so Cole looked around for leverage. He thought about the club in his hand, but it wasn't long enough to get the leverage in right angle. Plus, the last thing Cole wanted to do was to risk shattering his new stick on this seemingly immovable object than being without. He thought about trying to rev up the garbage truck, but could easily be a trap to lure all the bad guys. Cole also shuddered at the thought that it could be trapped in some way, and Cole didn't like traps one bit. Cole quietly wandered around for something sturdier as leverage to move the dumpster, and eventually found his way to a home improvement store. The store was completely gutted for raw materials, not so much to keep people warm. It rarely got cold enough to even cause a chill here so far south. Cole eventually found the exact dimensions of lumber he was looking for hidden under some tarps out back. The boards had to be thin enough to fit under the dumpster, but thick enough to not snap. The 3 boards he found would be perfect. With possibly the only remaining processed lumber in the area in hand, Cole headed back to the computer store confidently. Upon arriving to the partially secluded back entrance, one board got shoved into the panels behind the dumpster, then another got shoved under. With a third in hand, Cole stood on the board leveraged on the ground with a brick underneath. The dumpster popped right up. With the board in hand, Cole pressed it against the wall, leveraged against the board and the panel, and it swung loose. Cole expertly balanced the road and the board to the ground as the dumpster pivoted, landing gracefully. The dumpster landed behind him, barely making a noise. Cole flicked his flashlight back on for a brief moment and checked the lock. Whether by miracle or coincidence, the keyhole remained in pristine condition. With a twist of a doorknob, the heavy steel door swung open silently on its hinges. Cole shined the light in, checking for any tripwires, traps, or any such hazards, but there were none to be seen. No electronic alarms sounded either, as this portion of California had been cut off the grid for some time. That rendered all of the potential electronics essentially worthless, but maybe that was the point of the location, maybe flying under the radar. Electricity had been one of the first things to go, Cole recalled in his mind as he stepped into the storage room. He allowed the door to close silently behind him as he heard outside in the distance a small group talking in a foreign language.